Board work session. It is Wednesday, July 27th, 2022. It is 2:05 p.m. This is set to go till 2:30 p.m. This is a hybrid meeting. We're in Building 1, room 280. For public virtual attendance, you may follow along on the Thurston County YouTube channel. I'm Carolina Mejia. I'm the chair of the board. Vice Chair Tyne Menser is joining me in the boardroom, as well as and Assistant County Manager Robin Campbell is joining us via Zoom. We have some staff joining us via Zoom as well as in the boardroom, and the topics of today's discussion is CPED Martin Way Corridor Study Update. Yes. And so, Chris, am I passing it straight to you?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to make it short because we have a bit of information we want to make sure we get to you, but today's briefing is with TRPC and our partners, City of Lacey, on the Martin Way study. This is actually a grant that TRPC received. We received some pass-through funding back in 2020, began this particular project. The project is to enhance our joint planning work with the City of Lacey. It focuses on how to better implement mixed use and high density zoning districts along that corridor as envisioned by the Thurston County Code. And community planning is charged with implementing this type of joint planning pursuant to the joint planning agreement between Thurston County and the cities of Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater. The study will provide information that staff will then use and integrate into our joint plans and look at our current codes to potentially improve how those are working. With that very brief intro, I'm going to hand this off to Leah.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you for your time today. I'm Leah Davis with Community Planning. Also here is Allison Osterberg from TRPC, Ryan Andrews from the City of Lacey, Becky Kahn and Matt Unzelman from Thurston County Transportation, and Maya Teeple, and we will all answer questions after the presentation. So today's briefing is informational only. No direction is needed from the board. Allison is here to provide an update on the Martin Way Corridor Study, which has been in process for a couple of years. It is a collaboration between the cities of Lacey and Olympia, Intercity Transit, and the county. The county's section of Martin Way is in the Lacey urban growth area. It runs from Carpenter Road almost to Marvin Road. The goal of this study is to provide recommendations that would make Martin Way safer and provide opportunities for economic development and affordable housing. The study incorporates detailed information on market analysis and transportation issues provided by third-party consultants. It also includes results from public engagement events and surveys. This collaboration is especially important as we begin to work on with the City of Lacey on the Lacey Joint Plan update. Using the results of the Martin Way Corridor study to inform the goals and policies in the joint plan could have lasting economic and safety implications for the residents of Thurston County. Allison?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Allison Osterberg with Thurston Regional Planning Council, and I am so pleased to be able to share some of the highlights from the Martin Way Corridor study today. Just bring up some slides. We've got a lot that's been going on with this process. It's been a great collaborative effort for our region. And I'll run through a lot of things kind of quickly. There's not everything would fit in this presentation. And so we'll hopefully have some time for questions at the end if you want to get into any more details. So I'll provide a little background on the project, a little bit of pictures of Martin Way, past, present, and future, what we're looking at when we think about how it could look in the future, some alternatives for Martin Way, and what the next steps are for this project. So the Martin Way Corridor Study is a collaborative effort between Thurston Regional Planning Council, Thurston County, the City of Lacey, Olympia, and Intercity Transit. And it uses funding from the federal surface transportation funding that each of the communities receive. We pooled a bunch of funding because there was a recognition that Martin Way is one of our major roadways that connects all our communities, and that everyone had a piece of it that they wanted something done with and wanted to be able to focus on it. It made the most sense to talk about that together. There were also, and another thing I want to highlight is the partnership of this work has really been between community planning departments, and transportation public works departments. And so it's also been really collaborative in that respect. So when we talk about the Martin Way corridor, we're talking about the length of Martin Way from what we call the Pacific Triangle, so where State Avenue and 4th Avenue come in and Martin Way begins. And the main focus of this project is out to the intersection of Marvin Road, although we have also looked at the extended section between Marvin and Meridian Deutero, a part of which is also in the county UGA area, because that area has been changing a lot recently and is influencing the corridor as a whole. And the corridor, when we say a corridor, we're roughly talking about a quarter mile on either side of the roadway. So the shaded area in here indicates that the area of our study. And we tried to break it down. It's such a long corridor into some smaller subsections that we've used for some of our work. There have been a lot of pieces to the Martin Way corridor study. I'll just touch on some of the results from all of them, but just so you know, we've had a lot of technical work from outside consultants that have informed it. Leah mentioned a few things, the market study, some transportation analysis. And we've also done a lot of community outreach as best we can under the current pandemic conditions, including a number of surveys and virtual open houses and events that I'll highlight some of the results from. And all of that information, where we're at now, is we've kind of gotten through the process of looking at current conditions, looking at some alternatives for the corridor, and the next step that we're building toward is developing an action plan for the corridor that the jurisdictions and the different partners can use going forward. So looking back in Martin Way, historically, it opened in the 1930s, and it was intended to be it was very soon part of the state highway system. And it was always designed for people in the Olympia area to be able to move more quickly between Olympia and Tacoma. So it was designed through an area that was not previously developed. It was meant to be straight and fast and to enable people to travel by car, which was a fairly new transportation, growing transportation format at that time to connect these areas. And that was the intent. It was meant to help people in cars drive quickly from one place to another. Fast forward to today, Martin Way is now home. That corridor, that area that I showed you, is home to more than 9,000 people. It's a major economic driver for our region with over 11,000 jobs and more than 1,000 individual businesses, many of which are small businesses. It's one of our busiest arterials with more than 40,000 vehicle trips today, and it's a major transit corridor. IT estimates that about a quarter of their daily ridership is on Martin Way at some point. So there's a number of different routes. It's just a huge area that connects many different parts of our community. And when we look ahead to the future, we see that pattern of growth continuing. We're looking at a more than 50% increase in population over the next 25 years, nearly as much growth in employment. We're likely to see a lot more multifamily development. We already are on the corridor than we've seen historically. And all of that increased growth means that all of these needs that people are having for Martin Way, which are very different from what it was designed to do, can lead to increased congestion on the corridor and increased conflicts. And that was sort of the idea for this study, is that it's a good time to think now, as this growth is coming up in the future, for how we can plan to anticipate it. The vision for the Martin Way corridor, and this language is only slightly adapted from the language that's already included in the language for the zoning district that Thurston County uses for the Lacey UGA area along Martin Way, is that the Martin Way corridor is an attractive, mixed-use, high-density residential and commercial area where people enjoy walking, shopping, working, and living. And the vision has long been that over time it transitions away from more of an auto-dominated focus to an area that is more pedestrian-friendly and also encourages bicycling and supports high-capacity transit. And we've, throughout this project, reaffirmed that vision. And there's a lot of support for it. But what we saw in looking at current conditions on the corridor and some of our future potential conditions is that although some elements of this vision are being realized on the corridor, we still have a long way to go to make it happen. Specifically, when we look at transportation issues on the corridor, we do see it's one of our major, and in that area only, east-west connections. It's if you're not traveling on I-5, you're often taking Martin Way, and so we do see a fair amount of vehicle congestion, particularly near those highway interchanges, and those are slated to get worse in the future with the population projections we anticipate. There are gaps in the sidewalk network along the corridor, some pretty significant ones. And we frequently hear that there's not, because it's designed to be a roadway that was going straight, there aren't a lot of convenient places to get across it often. And so we have a lot of issues with people crossing the corridor, which is a real safety issue and contributes to some of the collision patterns we've seen on the corridor. It's particularly a problem, and IT drivers report this all the time, for people trying to get across the corridor to access transit stops. So there are anecdotal stories about people riding the 62 bus all the way to the end and coming back around just because they're worried about trying to get across the street. So people going out of their way. There are bike lanes all the way along the corridor, but they're not very comfortable. They don't feel very comfortable to travel. The speeds on the corridor are very high. There's a real mix of freight and other traffic that use Martin Way. And so bicyclists sometimes will opt to ride on the sidewalk, which can lead to conflicts with other users as well. And we do see there's just so much going on in Martin Way. And so a pattern we see in collisions is that at those access points, there's not a lot of direction on where you turn and how you turn. And that can lead to kind of some of the more side angle collisions that aren't necessarily the most serious, but are sort of persistent in certain parts of the corridor. On the land use side, what we see is, although we have a vision for high density development along the corridor, take advantage of the transportation resources that are there, there are a lot of underdeveloped areas along the corridor. There's not a lot of vacant land left on the corridor, but a lot of the areas were developed soon after Martin Way was developed. They're at a low density. They're not really at that high intensity urban development that we might think about when we're thinking about an urban corridor. There are residential neighborhoods, single family neighborhoods right off the corridor, and there are a lot of large parking areas. And Martin Way also it crosses a number of watersheds, a number of sensitive streams. And so there are a number of environmental areas, wetland areas, and stream adjacent areas that have environmental constraints that limit the type of development we might see in the future. As I mentioned, we went out and did a number of surveys talking to our community. When we talked to corridor residents, actually for everyone we talked to, safety came up as things that they wanted us to focus on in the corridor. For residents, improving safety for all different types of users on the corridor, improving access for people with disabilities, and again, increasing places to safely cross Martin Way were some of the high points that they hit on. When we reached out to businesses, something we heard a lot was that access question. There's a lot of access points to businesses on Martin Way, but they can feel unsafe to make left turns both off of Martin Way to get into businesses and also for people making left turns coming out of businesses. So that's a real concern. Businesses are also concerned about some of the congestion they see and some of the more aesthetic pieces that are tied with the feelings of safety. So landscaping, lighting, having access to parks. And for that far eastern section of the corridor, Marvin to Deutero, there's a little bit less transit access, and that's seen as a barrier by some of the businesses in that section. When we asked folks what they want to see more of on Martin Way, public amenities came up a lot. There aren't a lot of public places on the corridor for people to be. Strong support for what people use it for now, retail, services, restaurants, and support for houses, for more housing and more offices on the corridor. People would really like to see that complete sidewalk network and better resources for pedestrians, including crossings, and just a better aesthetic feel for the corridor in terms of the more attention to the landscaping and the look of it. We use that information to identify some goals for the corridor that we can shoot for going forward. That includes improving safety for users of the corridor, all modes, supporting inclusive growth on the corridor, balancing the needs of different users, increasing connectivity on the corridor, and improving continuity, and overall building a sense of place. So how could Martin Way look differently? On the transportation side, we looked at options for making minimal improvements, small investments, particularly targeted to pedestrians and bicyclists. We looked at some moderate improvements, bigger investments at key locations, and then we looked at what we call mighty improvements, or what would be really transformative on the corridor. And to give you a sense of what that would look like, on the moderate side, that could include some sort of buffering for bike lanes. It could include that complete sidewalk network and some access management to control those access points along the corridor. And a mighty alternative might include some of those same things, maybe more of a mixed use path or dedicated, more separated bike path. And one of the big things in the mighty alternative would be having what we call a BAT lane, business access lane, that would be mostly dedicated to transit use. And it would really allow transit to be able to run at speeds along the corridor that would make it more convenient to travel by transit. On the land use side, we talked a lot about nodes, and nodes are areas for concentrating development, particularly around key intersections. Some of the recommendations from our market study is that we might see better conditions if we focused our investments and attention around certain areas, and that could help drive also that sense of place. So we looked at nodal development that would be focused around concentrating affordable housing at key intersections, and one that would just be more redevelopment focused in general with a mix of housing and commercial, and one that looked at not modal, but continuing a corridor-wide approach. And just a little more focus on nodes. The results of that alternatives analysis, what we found is that overall on the transportation side, the mighty approach performs best for our goals, across all our goals, especially for safety and connectivity, but there's some trade-offs. It does come at slightly longer times for people traveling by car, and it is the most expensive because of the infrastructure that's required for that. That moderate approach provides a good balance of goals without taking away from any particular mode. And on the land use side, what we see is that a nodal approach performed really, really well for our goals, especially one that provides a lot of incentives for affordable housing. It really provides that affordable housing focus. And a corridor-wide approach has the broadest impact, but provides maybe a little bit less of that sense of place and community along the corridor. We presented these alternatives as part of an online open house and had a survey that was associated with that. It was a little earlier this summer. We heard strong support for jurisdictions finding and using resources to achieve the vision of Martin Way, strong support for proactive improvement of transportation facilities along the corridor, particularly for focus on walking and biking and for transit. And a strong support for that nodal approach, which is something to be thinking about as you go into your comprehensive plan and joint plan updates. So overall, what we've learned through this process, just to sum it up, what we know is that looking ahead, doing things the way that we have them now on the books, we're unlikely to meet the vision for Martin Way over the next 25 years. That dense, pedestrian-friendly corridor, it's not the way Martin Way was originally designed to be, and it will take some real intervention to do something that's a little bit different. But those interventions, both on transportation and on the land use side, can move the needle toward achieving the goals that we have for the corridor. And there's a lot of public support for making investments in this corridor. A lot of people are familiar with it. They use it in so many different ways. And so there's a lot of support in seeing something happen there that could really bring some vibrancy to and help better connect our communities. So with that, as I mentioned, we're wrapping all this information up into a corridor action plan, and that'll be passed off to Thurston County staff, as well as City of Lacey staff, City of Olympia staff, for incorporation into local plans. And that should all come out later this year. And I will leave it there.
Thank you, Allison. So Allison's presentation shows how land use and transportation policies, especially with a shared vision, can guide future development. You may see some of these policies incorporated into the Lacey Joint Plan in an effort to create affordable housing, boost economic development, and provide safer travel along Martin Way. And it looks like we have a few minutes for questions if you have any.
Thanks, Leah. Questions, Commissioner Messer? You have 5 minutes.
Okay. Allison, this might be something that we talked about at a climate meeting, I can't remember, but you were mentioning about, you know, what you just presented was kind of high level, but when we get more specific about it, we want to make things more pedestrian friendly and all of that. You mentioned something about, I think it was you, about like having businesses located on the street with parking lots behind rather than a massive parking lot in front, which enhances people's ability to walk from business to business and feel like it's a pedestrian type of corridor, not just only cars. And I guess I'm just curious, I mean, you know, how do you make a change like that? I mean, how does Thurston County Code or Lacey Code, you know, do you have to change the zoning to say if you want to build a business? And you said there's not much undeveloped land, but I mean, how do you convert from those, like, and would we have to actually change a lot of rules, or do our planning staffs, can they put those goals in the joint plan and they have latitude to require that under existing schemes? Like, how big of a deal is that to try to kind of change the way you structure and visually a corridor like that crosses jurisdictional boundaries?
Well, the answer is that yes, it can be done. I think what we see is that it is challenging with the model that we use now. So there are parts of the corridor that have that type of development. There are design standards currently on the corridor. You see development in parts of the corridor where you have development that's up to the street and the parking lots are set back a little bit more. The issue we run into on Martin Way is that we're talking about redevelopment. If we're wanting to see the corridor, we're talking about things that went in, you know, in the 90s and in the 2000s, and in some cases for Martin Way, built structures that went in the 30s and really haven't changed since then. And those predate the standards that we have now. And so typically what we have relied on is a market-driven approach that says, you know, a developer comes in and wants to provide something, and we say, you have to follow these rules. But that means the issue we run into on Martin Way is that it is very expensive to redevelop there. You have to come up to the new standards that we have, make those frontage improvements, do stormwater updates because there are really sensitive streams along that area. And it's challenging for those projects to pencil out. We did some focus group work talking to developers along the corridor, and what we heard really was that the zoning standards, your development standards, are not the major barrier on the corridor. It's just that the market isn't really quite there. And so a lot of what we're thinking, so there are, yes, absolutely, some regulatory standards that should change, particularly taking a nodal approach would be different from what you have on the books right now. But I think even a bigger thing, to achieve the vision, we need to look beyond a regulatory approach to one that provides incentives and that really does provides more financial tools to help incentivize and create the type of development that we want to see there. And there are examples in other communities there are a lot of examples of these sort of former state highway corridors that are now serving different purposes in communities. But it takes a heavier hand than maybe we've traditionally taken to development. And that's, yes, regulations are definitely a part of that, and they're an important part of it, but I think what we're seeing is they alone aren't going to get us to the vision.
I have two questions. My first question is in regards to the nodal development. And there's a section that both the primary focus node and the secondary focus node, and it's page 20, they both intersect with each other. And so what does that mean, you know, when it's intersecting, and it's only one area there where it intersects?
Sure. So on that map, I wouldn't take we didn't say these are the nodes. So that's one thing. What we said is, let's look at the concept of nodes. It would be up to jurisdictions that, as part of, for example, your planning process, to work with the community and work with your own staff to say, where does it make the most sense for these nodes to be? What we wanted to test in these alternatives is, what would a nodal approach get us? And so we took a couple of examples. This isn't necessarily where nodes would be, but we said, if we had these nodes at, we did one at that Pacific Triangle, we did one at Lily Road, we did one at Carpenter Road, we did one at, I think we had another one as well. That if we had these, what would that look like as far as development? But it would take a little bit more work with the community to identify exactly where they should be. And nodes can be different. So you could have, in terms of primary or a secondary node. A primary node could be an area, if you think of like, of say Lily Road or Pacific Triangle, where you're going to have the most development and a real concentration around some kind of public amenity or facility or something. And you might have a secondary node that's a little bit smaller, maybe somewhere near the Tangle Wild Thompson area, that's providing more of a neighborhood node function. And I think it's really important to think about how this connects to transit on the corridor and high capacity transit. So what you really want, if you're thinking of it from a transit-oriented perspective, is what is the environment in which people will say, oh, within this area, I can easily walk from the bus and to the bus to get to where I need to go. So in terms of, I think next steps coming out of this is thinking about nodes with this focus on how it would help serve transit connections for the region.
Thank you. Commissioner Messer,
Out of time. It's a
Okay.
very interesting topic, but thank you, Allison.
Okay, thank you. We are adjourned.
Thank you.